So continuing with this enthusiasm, we want now to invite you to listen to our discussions today. So I'm pleased to welcome on stage the speakers of the first discussion. So Josefine Nordling from FAIRsFAIR will be discussing with Antica Culina. Josefine Nordling is an open science specialist at CSC, the IT Center for Science. She is leading work on open scholarships and acts as the Finnish partner for the Knowledge Exchange project. She is also a member of the EO's Nordic initiative. Antica Culina is researcher at the Netherlands Institute of Ecology, and she is associate editor of the Journal of Animal Ecology, and she also acts as advisory member of several open science initiatives. Welcome on board, and happy to hear you discussing about fair policies and practices for researchers.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I hope you can all hear me okay. So, great. So the focus of our discussion in this session, as you said, will be on researchers and how the FAIRsFAIR project, but also a bit more broadly speaking, how the community can assist researchers in their FAIR uptake. So we'll start by discussing some of the work that FAIRsFAIR has produced recently to help researchers on their journey towards good research data management with the help of the FAIR principles. So most recently, the work package working on supporting FAIR policies and practices has produced a series of what we call implementation stories. So these stories are divided into 7 themes to allow easier navigation among the stories, but also to manage the expectations of what they might content. But we these stories that we have produced, so they aim to illustrate also very reader-friendly good practices that different types of stakeholders can take, such as service providers, universities, funding bodies, working groups, etc., can take to support the implementation of the FAIR principles. So in other words, these showcase very kind of practical examples of how FAIR data is being enabled in research. And we really hope that these can serve as an inspiration for our others, for organizations and researchers to drive the necessary change towards increased FAIR, and to also be able to take the FAIR principles into consideration when developing services and processes. So without further ado, I would like to ask you, Antica, quite general question. How do you feel about these types of stories that are telling about real life solutions to really challenging issues that we all face? Do you think that our target group, so the researchers, can get any support out of these stories, and in which ways do you think that they are supported?
Thank you, Josefine, for the introduction. So yes, reading through these stories, I think first, they are really useful to those who are implementing different FAIR policies or different components of the FAIR kind of, I have to say, like a circle, in sense of you have to support researchers in different ways to enable them to do FAIR, but also researchers need to recognize the benefits of doing it FAIR and see different ways of how this can be done. So for me, interesting thing was when I read the stories, even if some of them were not from my particular area of domain of science, so I'm a science ecologist, I can still see the relevance for our domain. For example, there is a story about ontologies in social sciences. So I think it would be great if we do something like that in life sciences, particularly, for example, in ecology. So they can really inspire other communities to do something along the lines, because obviously FAIR principles are kind of common, but they also need to be adjusted for each particular community, because FAIR might mean different and be differently slightly implemented in different communities. So I think these stories can help researchers, but also those who are leading research institutions to tailor approach for their own community and then guide that community to a new FAIR era of data and software.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and also something that was actually going to be my follow-up question. So that's good that it was already answered in your reply there. So maybe going on to the next favorite topic of mine, so that would be around recognizing and rewarding open science and FAIR research. Shelley already touched upon this topic among other topics. So we have 2 implementation stories around this topic. So one is introducing the concept of a digital badge for responsible conduct of research that has been implemented in the University College Cork in Ireland. So maybe just explaining shortly what this story is about. You'll all soon be able to read the whole story yourselves once they are published. But badges of different sorts have been in that university awarded both to staff and researchers for quite a few years, so since 2017. However, the badges for awarding responsible conduct of research came a little bit later, so in 2019, but they have seem to have a quite stable sort of structure around this, and also, you know, a system based on a certain types of criteria on how to receive these badges. So one has to fulfill a particular set of minimum standards, but also a minimum amount of hours spent on a certain activity. So that's one. So digital badges for conducting responsible research. And the other story I wanted to highlight here in this respect is on incentive mechanisms implemented as part of the Open Science program at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And in this program, they have included awareness, training, and recognition as the main focal points. They have dedicated representatives that are monitoring the practices and taking notes of the needs of researchers. And so I was going to ask you, so generally, there is a notion that there is somewhat of a misalignment between, you know, what is expected of the researchers to do in terms of open science and FAIR research, and then also kind of what they are really expected to do in their line of research. So they are fairly time pressured, and in some disciplines also pressured to publish a lot of publications, and you know, with the all the metrics involved in that. So how do you feel that this problem can be tackled in some way? Do you think that the stories that they tell about in those texts could be something that more disciplines could take on, or more universities as well? Do you think that that would be a viable solution?
Yeah, so I thought both of these stories are really good examples of how different institutions have approached recognizing the importance of doing science in a different way than we have been doing it for quite many years, or maybe decades. So they can, in that sense, really be inspirational. But what I feel is still lacking generally, not just in my specific area of work. People today, scientists, are very mobile. So we move countries, we move institutions. So if we don't have an alignment in, well, some kind of recognition matrices or whatever is developed between countries and between institutions, if I achieve something at my university that might value certain open practices or FAIR practices, maybe it means literally nothing in another institution where I want to move. And movement of researchers between institutions is basically what everybody expects of us. We are expected to move at least several institutions. So I would really love to see that more institutions are kind of adopting similar approaches to start to value different practices, because yes, we are in between two fires at the moment. So I personally really value fair and open, and I'm doing it that way because I really think I want to do it, but that's my personal thing, which doesn't necessarily reflect into benefits to my research career per se. But I've taken up that cost, but I know people that don't want to take that cost. So it would be really nice if we can now see these little hubs where things start to change and they kind of expand to other universities or institutions within the country, and then within Europe, and then they kind of merge. So I think that's really necessary next kind of step of the evolution of FAIR for researchers.
Yeah, that was really interesting to hear that you have some kind of a solution or idea on how we could sort of spread good practices among various parts of research. So I fully agree with you there. So that's really the way to move forward. Next, maybe I would want to pick your mind on the infrastructure maybe side of things, or not so much the technical part, but we have also provided some stories about or guidance as well on PIDs and FAIR enabling services. For example, the Finnish suite of services that is simply called FAIR Data. So I was wondering if you have thought of this or have any impression of, how informed are researchers generally on these topics, and what might be the criteria that they would base their decision on if they would like to choose a service over another service. So do you have a feeling if FAIR enabling services are the ones that are preferred, or if there is something else that plays into this topic, or the between the services that they would choose in that case?
Yeah, I think majority of researchers, at least from my circle, these are ecologists, there is a huge disconnection from FAIR services, and there are some of us that are part of the movement in a way, so we are aware, but an average researcher wouldn't be aware of these things. What is the root of that? It's very difficult to say. Well, part of it is obviously lack of education, so we just don't have enough training to understand what this means and how to navigate this system, because even like all the open science and FAIR services, there are plenty of them at this point, but I think average researcher doesn't even know where to start. So what I feel is kind of missing is that representatives from the community of, let's call it FAIR community, like from FAIRsFAIR, they need to kind of get more into the research communities themselves. For example, go for conferences. We have a lot of conferences where we never have anybody representing anything about open science or FAIR data. I do, but I never see anybody else. So I feel, how do we learn is by like somebody representing that to us. So that can be either internal person like myself who is aware of these things, but they can also be external people from other communities that come to us, and then they basically introduce researchers how to start to navigate all of this. And I know many people that hear about FAIR only once they have to submit something for their grant, and then suddenly they don't know where to start, and usually they would talk to librarians of the institution. So that's their starting point. So I guess then librarians are really important in this respect to kind of communicate with the researchers about FAIR.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. So it's not all about the technology and the infrastructure. It's more about the training and the awareness raising among researchers that would be maybe the very next step in advancing things.
Yeah, and if I could just add, like, because things are always interconnected with training, I also know people that would like to go for training, for example, in how to do data FAIR, but their supervisor wouldn't allow this because they want them to do something else that's more important for their classical, what we see as a research tasks. So many people just don't even have the opportunity, even if they would like to attend these kinds of trainings. So I guess that's also one part of this relatively complex issue that has many different layers and many different actors. But I want to be positive because I think things have really improved in the last 5-6 years, really drastically. So we have a good ground here, but now we need to connect different components and then reach that level where we can really say that we have this, a lot of opportunities to use great data for a better world.
Yeah, and then we come into the other topic of that is a favorite of mine, that is the research evaluation. So whether we should change the way research is being evaluated. So that's for sure, that's something needs to be changed to accommodate the requirements of open science and FAIR in many ways. So trying to find the right balance between what is expected and what the researcher can accomplish in the end. So some sort of rewarding and credit system would for sure be the right tool here.
Yeah, and I think the implementation story from the Utrecht University, when they surveyed their researchers, the main two main obstacles for researchers were a lack of time and lack of recognition. But lack of time is related to lack of recognition because you have limited time to do your research. And if you just have to produce papers, then you use all of that time to produce your paper. So that's your lack of time. So there's no time to do FAIR data. There's no time to educate yourself about FAIR data. There's no time to put your data in our metadata into FAIR format. So yeah, obviously there needs to be change in how we evaluate researchers.